A while ago, I made a video comparing Naruto parts 1 and 2. I'm going to do the same for One Piece because I feel like there are major differences, but I guarantee the results will not be the same. I actually dropped One Piece after Luffy lost to Kaido the first time because I realized how much I wasn't enjoying the story. A lot of that is due to the differences between the parts. The first difference between the parts is the amount of characters in each arc. In part 1, the arcs had the Straw Hats as recurring characters and everyone else was new for the most part. The amount of characters outside the Straw Hats was often minimal, especially in earlier arcs. Even long arcs like Alabasta and Enies Lobby, which are 63 and 56 chapters respectively, only have a small amount of major characters. Alabasta has maybe triple the Straw Hats' current total crew number, which was 6 at the time, and Enies Lobby had a little over double the Straw Hats crew, giving almost every member a solo fight. At the time, the Straw Hats had 8 members, but in part 2, the arcs are cluttered with characters, old and new. Just look at Dressrosa, Whole Cake Island, and Wano. On top of this, the crew has to frequently be split up to make way for the abundance of new characters. In Punk Hazard, the crew was split up on the island. In Dressrosa, only half of the crew was in most of the arc, while the other half went to Zou off-screen. They reunited in Zou, but then half stayed while half went to Whole Cake Island for Sanji. Wano is one of the few arcs that includes all of the Straw Hats, and as a result, it's extremely cluttered. I don't like the crew splitting up, but I also don't like the cluttered characters. The second difference is the plot. In part 1, each arc was a new island with a mostly simple and straightforward self-contained plot. There was also the occasional super arc, which would be Arlong Park, Alabasta, and Enies Lobby. In part 2, the arcs are extremely long. In part 1, Skypiea sits at 66 chapters, and the other 2 arcs I mentioned were 63 and 56 chapters long. But arcs don't usually reach this length in part 1. Arlong Park was 27, Thriller Bark was 48, and Marineford was 31. These are the big arcs of part 1. In part 2, Fishman Island is already 51 chapters long, Punk Hazard is 46, Dressrosa is 102, Whole Cake is 78, and Wano is only at 109 as of now. Out of the big arcs, Punk Hazard's 46 was the shortest, and the story has already reached 100 twice. In part 1, 66 was the longest, and the number 60 was only hit twice. Apart from length, the arcs in part 2 feel like they drag more than they did in part 1, especially at the start of an arc. For example, Punk Hazard had the body switching stuff, and Dressrosa had a whole tournament in the middle of the arc. The plot in part 2 is often dealing with the loose plot threads that I mentioned in another video. This personally makes the arcs feel less distinct from one another, especially when every island is now connected to Big Mom or Kaido. Hell, Big Mom even appears in Kaido's arc as a major character, further reinforcing this. And the fourth point is that there is somehow no super arc yet. Arcs reach 100 chapters but can't give each Straw Hat a career-defining battle when part 1 did it 3 different times. The third difference is the fights. In part 1, the fights were decent to good. Fights like the ones in Arlong Park, Alabasta, and Enies Lobby were great. But in part 2, the fights rely heavily on Haki, and I already explained how Haki was probably the worst power system in battle manga in another video, making the fights pretty average as well. The fourth difference is the shine. In part 1, the other characters were allowed to shine a lot more. Other Straw Hats had signature battles. Zoro had Hachan, Daz Bones, and Kaku. Sanji had Kuroobi, Bon Clay, and Jabra. Nami had Double Finger and Caulifla. Part 2 only really gives Luffy dope fights. Most of Zoro's fights have been easy stomps. Sanji lost about half of his big fights, if not more. Frankie had Senor Pink, and the rest don't really fight. The fifth and final difference is the art. I really don't like to bring up art when talking about a story's quality, but the art is a major reason why I can't even read and might never read One Piece again. In part 1, the art was what you'd expect from a good battle manga. The important and cool panels had space and room to breathe. The poses were dynamic and the artwork was clean and crisp. The dialogue was spaced out well enough. But in part 2, the art has taken a major hit. Oda can still draw, it's just that his execution leaves much to be desired. Important moments don't always have the room to breathe. Several attacks are confined in a small panel with tiny art. This was a problem back in Fishman Island. The characters showing off the new attacks on the Kraken were drawn really small and the anime had to expand upon it. A recent example is Zoro using Rokuda no Tsuji on Prometheus. The panel for Zoro using his new attack is tiny. The artwork in part 2, especially recently, is often scribbly and messy, and the biggest offender is the amount of dialogue. Small panels are filled with huge word bubbles that take up most of the space and make the manga a chore to read. Look at any fight in part 1 and compare it to what we have in part 2. The art in part 2 can look good from time to time, but part 1's art always looked good. All of these negatives are likely a source of stress and a deteriorating physical condition from drawing weekly. Oda now prioritizes effectiveness over making the manga fun to read. Small panels are faster to draw, and so is a scribbly art style. Filling panels with word bubbles means that the characters can be drawn smaller or not at all, which is once again faster. Naruto and Bleach didn't really go through such a huge downgrade in art, but that's probably because they didn't hit 1000 chapters. It kinda hurts to see the art deteriorate, but it was Oda's choice to keep the manga going this long. In conclusion, part 1 and part 2 are different in the amount of characters per arc, the plot for each arc, the quality of the fights, the amount of shine the characters get, and the art. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and check out my manga for free online. If you enjoy my content, please consider donating to my Patreon. All important links will be in the description.